Welcome to Bramble Cottage. This is the little garden that I've just started establishing here since we've moved in, and this is the Flowering Quince that was already here when we arrived. Today's been all about this quince because I've never tried the fruits from this shrub before, but it had some flowers when we first arrived. Those have produced a few fruit which have since ripened, and today I finally harvested them and did some reading about what they were like and how to process them, and a few taste tests that we'll get into later. But first it's necessary to harvest the fruit, and I found that although this shrub only contains a handful of fruits, it was quite difficult to get at them because they're all hidden in amongst the branches underneath the green layer on the outside. So it was a case of looking through the leaves and into the dense thicket inside, and then reaching in to try and get at the fruits where I found them. A little bit more about this plant. This is a shrub from the genus Chaenomeles. Flowering Quince is what it's commonly known as, and this one is probably a Chaenomeles superba, which is a hybrid between two other species, Speciosa and Japonica. And the reason I think that this is probably a Chaenomeles superba is because it's in the garden, so that means it's likely a cultivar, and in the UK most cultivar Chaenomeles with red flowers like this one are Chaenomeles superba. We'll probably never know exactly which cultivar this one might be, but if anyone has any ideas or recognises it, do let me know. Right, this flowering quince behind me now is the plant that I was most interested in when we first came to view Bramble Cottage, and I was looking at what was already available on site towards my food forest. It's ornamental in its own right with these gorgeous red flowers that usually turn up in spring, but for this year it's added a few more this October, and then it produces these rock hard fruit that I've heard range in flavour from lemony all the way through to orangey, and they're really aromatic and great for making lemonades and things like that. So I'm looking forward to doing some experiments with the few fruit that we've got from this plant and to see what we get. Last week, Cameron and I visited our previous house on the northeast coast of Scotland, which we're still in the process of trying to sell. And one of the things I'm regularly doing there is lifting some of my existing plants and bringing them back to Bramble Cottage to help establish my new garden here. So this is a crate of everything we brought back last week. It's a 3-hour drive up to the north of Scotland for us, and then we have about 3 hours there to get everything we want to do done, and then another 3-hour drive back down. Now that it's October, that means that it's getting dusky by the time we get home, and so this was a high-speed planting session to try and get everything in before it got dark or too dark to be able to see. This bit that I'm planting here is one of several patches on what was originally the lawn at Bramble Cottage that I'm now trying to turn into beds, and I'm doing this using a no-dig method purely because I find it quicker than lifting the turf on the entire lawn. So I've laid corrugated cardboard that's unbleached with as little printing on it as possible directly onto the cut lawn, and then I've mulched on top of that. It looks really haphazard, and that's because I'm doing this collection of plants from the north of Scotland, so I wanted several small patches dotted around that I would be able to put plants into sort of in suitable locations for shade or shelter and that kind of thing, without needing to have too much cardboard or too much mulch available in one go. It's a very piecemeal process for getting the garden planted, but given time and money limitations, it feels like the most pragmatic way to begin getting things in this year, and then next year I'll probably move things around a bit once I can see better what I've got. One of the limitations of using a no-dig cardboard and mulch method that you can see here is that we have quite a lot of rabbits in the area, and they routinely come in and scratch through the mulch, pluck away the cardboard once it's damp. It just comes away with their claws really easily, and they make little holes, and then the turf comes growing straight through that again, and so I'm having to be quite careful about weeding the grass out of the mulch and repatching bits of mulch as I go. It doesn't help that I'm adding to this problem by myself cutting holes in the mulch to plant plants. So quite a few of the plants that I've already put in have small amounts of grass coming around them, so I may live to regret this method entirely in a few years' time. In this case, I've decided to take revenge on some of the grass that snuck through the mulch by cutting it out and putting another one of my plants in its place. This is Valeriana rubra, although I knew it as Centranthus rubra until a few years ago, and it's commonly called red valerian in the UK. It is related to the medicinal valerian, but again, it doesn't look at all like medicinal valerian, and I didn't know that until a few years ago when its name changed. It's got beautiful sort of cerise red flowers, and it will grow almost anywhere, including in tiny crevices in stony walls and places like that. So I really love this plant, even though it's not famous for any particular medicinal or edible properties. Having said that, you can eat the young leaves at the very least, and their value is that they're available in the middle of winter when other salad leaves are often scarce, but they're not particularly palatable. They're quite bitter. I've tried them a little bit, just over 1 or maybe 2 seasons. I'm definitely not confident with this one as a food forest plant yet, but maybe I'll get there at some point. One recent discovery about this plant, having been shut in a car with it for 3 hours, is it does share the smelly roots of the medicinal valerian, which some people liken to cat pee or to old socks. I happen not to mind it so much, but I can't say the same for Cameron. I mentioned rabbits. Well, this is a rabbit burrow that appeared recently right near where I've been putting my brand new beds in. It's almost as if they think I've been opening a buffet on their behalf. So I am desperately going to need rabbit fencing around this little area of garden at some point in the future. And where I'd hoped I could lazily avoid having to dig down to put the wire mesh in, I now think that I'm going to need to do something like that, because I also have something resembling a molehill that turned up on top of where I'd planted my Meadowsweet. And I think what it actually is rabbits that have burrowed under the lawn and eaten at the roots of the plant. So that's why I brought another Meadowsweet back with me from our old house this last week, and I'm planting a new one a bit further away. Because I'm doing the planting of my garden so sporadically every time I happen to have brought some plants back from our old house, I'm cutting some of the stems back quite high just to keep them as markers of where I've put things. I'm finding it far too easy to lose track. This bed is right next to a beautiful old cobbled path that runs up to the original front door. But it's curious because it's almost as if the cobbled path runs under the bed down on a camber and goes deeper and deeper. Every part of this bed along this wall that I've dug in so far, I keep digging up cobbles, no matter how far down I go. This is my Amelanchier alnifolia Northline, or Saskatoon to most of us. It's a berry bush, which is new to me actually. I only planted it in our old garden just a year ago. I've had one season with a small number of flowers and a small number of berries, and the birds got every single one of those because we were in the process of moving and we were never there in time to see them ripen. But from everything I've understood, this plant should be a great addition to my food forest, and so I'm putting it in a special location here, which will hopefully be far better than where it was planted at the old place. This little spot is technically north facing from the wall aspect, but it's down this lane with a south facing wall opposite, so I'm hoping there'll be some heat bounced, and also because the nearby buildings are quite low, the south sun should still meet the top of this bush as it gets taller. I chose the cultivar Northline in part because it's a slightly smaller variety and I've never had a very big garden, so I want to get the biggest diversity of plants without taking up too much space or shading out other plants, so I'm hoping this one will fit in this spot here. It was getting really dark by the time I finished planting, but this being Scotland, it had been raining all day, so luckily I didn't need to do too much watering at the end. And now it's time to get back to those flowering quince fruit and see what they're really like. Because the few fruit I got off the bush were really variable, I decided to start by grouping them into types so that we could taste test them each separately. I then cut each one in half and used the end of a spoon to try and scoop the seeds out, following advice from one of the books I have. However, I found this actually doesn't work as well as just using a small paring knife, as it's necessary to cut through the capsule quite a few times as well. The difference here might be that I'm using freshly harvested fruit that are pretty hard, whereas some of the books recommend putting them in the freezer first to make them soft and then processing them ahead of liquidizing them for use as flavourings in lemonades and things like that. Since doing this, I've also discovered that people often cut them in half in the opposite direction, so not like you would normally do an apple, but crossways, so that you get a really nice, beautiful star shape with the seed capsules in the middle. And maybe this is what the book that advised me was doing, because that would make it easier to scoop the seeds out with a spoon too. The reason it's necessary to scoop the seeds out is because this plant belongs to the Rosaceae family, and so like apples, the seeds contain cyanide-related compounds which could be harmful if eaten. I've now cut 2 sample slices from each of my different fruit types, and so it's time to go get my guinea pig. So I've got my 5 different choices of quince. Do you want to start with the most ripe one, and then we'll see where we get to?
Do you want to start with the most ripe one?
Well, should we start with the most ripe one? Let's start. This is the one that is a little bit beyond it. So this is the one that's really obviously been through a frost, and that softens the fruit, and it was much easier to cut as a result, and so it should also be a bit sweeter.
How about you go first?
Okay. I quite like it. You know.
It's a little bit tart. It's actually not bad. Like
That's the sweetest one, probably.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
I'll
Shall we do? Okay, you're going to go for the worst one now. So this is the one that isn't. Well, this is the one that isn't at all ripe, so it's still green. So in theory, this should be the tartest of all of them. So it gets over and done with.
Good.
Oh. That one's almost better, isn't it?
Oh wow. Maybe I've got a slight acuity to sourness, but it's made my jaw ache. It's a nice flavour again, it's just very sharp.
This is why they're not used as food. So I was thinking this one next, because this one's the one with the really sandpapery outer skin. And I'm not sure what causes that in quince, but when you get this in apples, then they're horrible to eat because of the texture, in my opinion. But they're often much sweeter inside, juicier. Each one seems a lot sweeter than the last, but I think it's because it starts with a sweet floweriness and then it turns to bitter tannininess towards the end.
That one definitely had a sweet edge to begin with, and it didn't make my lips curl.
And then this one and this one, they're kind of much for muchness, so we're just they're equally ripe, but this one's the size that most of them came out. And then we've got one large one to finish to see if it's different.
Oh, that's appley.
That one's almost a neat off the tree thing-ish.
I mean, you wouldn't want a whole one in one go.
No. Last one.
Okay.
And this one should be the best of the lot, other than maybe that one. No. That one's not the best of the lot.
Wow.
I think that one's the best of the lot, wasn't it?
Mm.
Which is great, because we've got 4 of those. Well,
wonderful.
Well, that wraps up taste testing of Flowering Quince or Chaenomeles for now, and I've since put the remaining fruit in the freezer so that we can soften them up over a period of time. We'll take them out at some point in the future and have a go at making some sort of refreshing beverage out of them.